Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Vitali, and welcome to Psychic Podcast. In this episode, I'm really excited again to have back on the show again my best friend, one of my best friends ever, Keith Strandberg. This is a part two interview. In the first interview, I hope you enjoyed it. Part one, we talked about how he started and some of the earlier films. In this interview, we're going to now talk about other films he's done and projects he's working on. Please let me tell you a little bit about Keith before we bring him on the show. He's an award-winning writer. He won Best Screenplay for a film I'm very familiar with. A screenplay I'm familiar with. It's called Frontier Honor. It's a story about Simon Kenton, a frontiersman, and he won Best Screenplay at the New York International Film Festival. He's got a master's degree in script writing. He's penned over 30 screenplays, and 10 of which have been made into movies. Movies like No Retreat, No Surrender 1, 2, and 3, American Shaolin, King of the Kickboxers, Super Fights, Blood Moon, and others. Please welcome my good friend, Keith Strandberg. Hey, Keith, good to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me back. I enjoyed our first show, and I'm looking forward to the second one. Thanks.
I, you know, it, people say that, like we enjoy this. We like, you know, rehashing over our history and talking about not only the films we've been in but future projects and stuff like that. But to start on this one, I want to go back to our beginning and stuff because we actually started together before we started doing films together, and we were working for a guy named Barry French. It was for a company called Impact, and these were like pads you could kick and punch, and it would register on the LCD readout the amount of force used. And so we would go to Ohio together, and then you represented the company for the writing, and I did the action. I guess I would showcase the product, and then we would travel to tournaments around the country.
It was a very good idea for a product. You remember it had a piece of it was called piezoelectric film inside that would deform when you punched it or kicked it and give you a readout. It would generate electricity, and that would show in the readout. So it would tell you how effective your punch was or your kick was. But what I remember most was the time we got to hang out together. We really developed our friendship during that time. We play sports while we were traveling, and we went all over the world with that. I mean, it was really fun, and that's what really got me interested in working with you for the movies, because then we got you into No Retreat, No Surrender 3, which was the first movie you did with me and with Seasonal Film, and then we started producing together too later on. So it was a great beginning, that's for sure.
Well, I really enjoyed. We used to represent that product, and at the end of every night, depending on where we went, we'd go to the tournament, and we set up a booth. We'd have the product displayed. I would showcase it by kicking and challenging any of the local fighters there at the tournament to see how hard they would kick. But we'd always end it by going to the gym that night and playing basketball. We play one on one, and sometimes, most of the time, we try to find a couple of other people to play against us, and we got good. I mean, I don't want to brag or anything, but it was part of the fun times of our life playing basketball against other people.
But when we did the action camps, you remember that we challenged everybody at the action camp to see if they could beat us in 2-on-2, you and me against anybody, and nobody ever beat us because I had the brute force and you had the skill.
No, we'd go. I'd go to your house sometimes in Lancaster, and of course you had a little basketball goal in your driveway, and you would drive me into the bushes, and I'm like, "That's a foul," and you go, "Where's the blood? No blood, no foul." Oh,
Well, that
oh my god!
I remember once we played two college basketball players. Remember, they were taller than
Right?
us. They were theoretically better than us. But I would just go down and I would foul the heck out of them, and they would never call a
Yep.
foul because we weren't college basketball players. So they were like, "I'm not calling a foul on this guy." And then you'd hit from outside, and we ended up beating them, and they were just so frustrated. But I was not above fouling the crap out of them to make sure we could win.
I remember that so well too because one of the brothers um, ended up winning the Battle of Atlanta. He got in martial arts, and fought at the bottom of the line and won grand championship. And I spoke to him and I asked him if he remembered our time together. And he goes, "Of course." He said, he said, "You beat me and my brother." And his brother played in for college. And he goes, "You
Right.
guys were tough." And he couldn't stop something called Strandberg's hook. You had that little hook, that little thing, and nobody could stop it. That thing was like, should have been outlawed in 5 states.
Well, I think you finally figured out how to do it. But that's when we
Right?
stopped playing basketball together. Once you figured out how to do it, I won't tell anybody how to do it, so don't worry. Your secret's safe with me.
Yeah. No, literally, it's almost impossible to stop. You really can't. I was so frustrated because we played, not being facetious, we probably played hundreds and hundreds of one-on-ones, and I just couldn't stop that hook. And I figured it out how to do it. And anyone listening, if you're a part of the NBA, if you contact me, I will teach you how to stop fall away shots. Guaranteed. I'm not even exaggerating. If you're playing in the NBA and you're being beat by your opponent doing the fallaways, I know how to stop that technique. But it only took me like being killed 1,000 times before I figured it out. But also not that, but also football. And I don't want to bore the listeners. Because we had so much fun together because we go to the action film camp, and one of the first things we did is we welcome everybody there, and we always made fun. We always said this: we went, "Please raise your hands if you're a world champion," and 80% of the people would raise their hands. They always were world champions, and I'd always say the same rebuttal: "What world are we talking about?" And then we would challenge anybody, team up, find somebody. We'll play you 2-on-2 in basketball or 2-on-2 in football. And you were the man with the golden arm. That's what you called yourself. But you did have you could have been in a circus with your arm. And one time I'll quit talking. My wife says I talk too much in these podcasts, but I got to tell this one story. We're in Berlin, and you and I we get up every morning, we run and we throw the footballs, and we're in one of these historic, beautiful, I don't know, these buildings that are rectangle, and they have the atrium in the middle. And we're throwing back and forth, and this German fellow is way across. He must have to be 75 yards across the buildings over there. And he goes, "Hey, hey, throw me the ball." And you threw him the football. And they have their football is soccer. He really didn't know how to catch the ball. So he put his hands out like this. And as the football came, he did this, but it hit him right between the eyes. And then he just dropped. And you were concerned about his health. And I was more impressed with your arm going, how accurate can anybody be? You threw a ball 75 yards and hit him right in the head.
Well, I moved over to Switzerland here, and I started playing in a league here in Switzerland because they play American football here. And I got a team with a couple of expats and people from England and Canada and some locals, and we ended up winning national titles 4 times.
Wow.
Football here with me as the quarterback, so we had a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I'm not being facetious. You really, with that arm, you could throw. I mean, you were as good as any quarterback I've ever seen for distance and throwing. We would play 2-on-2 against all these different challenges we had in the film camps. We're not talking once or twice. We're talking 10 years of challenges, 10 years.
Yeah,
And no one ever could beat us in 2-on-2 in basketball. Kayla, now we actually, your son would jump in the basketball sometimes. We'd have 3-on-3, and
that's right.
he's like 6'7", so he would probably be the catalyst for us winning. But we never got beaten, and we'd have challenges. We'd make that announcement at the film camp, and we'd say, "Listen, if anybody wants to challenge us, we've never been beaten." And one year we had a couple guys says, "You're going to be beaten this year," and I remember thinking, "Oh, this is going to be tough." It didn't happen.
Well, we would also, when we were making Blood Moon and some of the other movies, you and I would be playing basketball on the weekend, on the one day we had off, or we'd play basketball at the end of the day or something like that. And what's interesting is that most martial artists, they're good at martial arts. I mean, you're a very skilled all around athlete. I mean, you ran track in college. You're a good basketball player. You're a good tennis player, which is quite rare, I think, for martial arts. Because most martial arts, they're good at martial arts, but it doesn't translate into any other sport. And if you remember our friend who passed away, Darren Shalabi, he wanted to play basketball. And I don't know if you remember this, but you and I were shooting around, and he came out, "Oh, let me shoot, let me shoot." And we passed him the ball, and he had no idea how to shoot a basketball. And I think that's the case with most people. I mean, you're a good all around athlete. I like to think I'm a good all around athlete. But most people that are specialized, especially like in martial arts or
Right.
another sport, they're not good at other sports because they've been so specialized at that one sport. But I think you're the rare exception where you're really a skilled all around athlete.
Well, we were fortunate to spend so much time together at these action film camps with Marco Di Pasquale, and we had Joe Hess and Ron Succarati and Mike Jones and all these guys there, and it got to be where we enjoyed it so much because I'd fly up to Lancaster, we get on our motorcycles, and then we would tour a little bit, take a few days off, and ride on motorcycles together, and I think some of my favorite times of my life are on the motorcycle together, and we go into upstate New York, or we'd visit just different waterfalls and just whatever we could find, and that was just so much fun. You still ride your bike a lot?
Oh, I'm on my motorcycle all the time. So here in Switzerland, it's such a beautiful place to ride. Yeah, those were really the glory days for me. The camaraderie that we had, and the going and making movies and having a team and really doing something that I really think was worthwhile. As we mentioned in the last podcast, we had impact on people's lives, and you know, I'd love to do that again. I mean, I'm trying to reboot No Retreat, No Surrender and try to make a movie that'll have the same impact today that it had on people back. It's now been more
Right.
than 30 years ago.
I was saying we spoke before about it, and I'm going to bring it up again. Is that I wasn't even aware of the positive impact that you and I and the film I did with Lauren at that time, No Retreat, No Surrender 3, had on so many people around the world. And
Right.
I've received, get this, text or emails from people from 45 different countries around the world about that film. So it's not like I got one person. I mean, people that said it changed their lives, it inspired them, it moved them. We had a poster signing contest for Lauren and I did that. We put it on. Lauren was a big help for my podcast. So whoever left the best comment about the film you wrote and produced, No Retreat, No Surrender 3, whoever left the best comment would win the signed poster. And this lady from Romania was just fantastic. The things that she wrote moved both Lauren and I. I mean, those words were just majestic. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's kind of cool. Now, on the other hand, I read another one yesterday, not on the podcast, on another one where they go, Vitali sucks as an actor, but he's pretty good at martial arts. So, my comment usually is bite me on those, but I try to stay away from anything negative. But
Well,
I always had confidence with my kicks, and I always had confidence working with you because, you were so supportive and you had a great team behind me. And the acting was harder for me than most people because I was a fighter making a transition from being in the ring to the screen, basically. So when you fight, you're taught not to show or project emotions at all. And the exact opposite when you're making a film, you have to project at all times. But we had such a great time together. We did these films. After No Retreat, No Surrender 3, I did other films, and then you went in to do, was King of the Kickboxers next or American Shaolin your next film?
it was King of the Kickboxers next, and then it was American Shaolin, and then it was Blood Moon, and then Super Fights. So we went through a progression, and the industry was really strong for us until right after King of the Kickboxers. I remember taking King of the Kickboxers to the Milan Film Festival. You remember we went to
Right.
Milan once for the film festival, and it was so well received, and we sold it all over the world. It was extremely successful. Then we decided, oh, we'll make Blood Moon. We spent more money on Blood Moon than we'd ever spent before, and we took it. Then 2 years later, we took it again to the Milan Film Festival. We thought, oh, this is an even better movie than King of the Kickboxers. We're gonna make so much money, and that's just the time when the bottom fell out of the low budget film market,
Right.
especially in big countries like the U.S. and the U.K. I remember as an example, King of the Kickboxers. I think we might have sold. These are just numbers, but let's say we sold King of the Kickboxers to the UK market for $500,000. We went to the exact same guy 2 years later with arguably a better movie with better production value. We spent 3 times the money on that movie, and this guy offered us $50,000 for it.
Yeah, I guess the right. word could be liquid because it's so fluid right now. It's now streaming and distributions deals are generated differently now. Everything's different. In fact, nobody's the expert at it anymore. They're all trying to figure the way forward as we're doing that. I went with you to two different film festivals. I know the one I really enjoyed was also with Super Fights. We did Super Fights together. Brandon Gaines was the star, and I was the bad guy. I
Hmm.
love being the bad guy in that film. I think one of my favorite endings of all films was that ending of that film, because
Oh yeah,
Tony Leung was the stunt coordinator for that. He had a sense of timing, and the way that last scene was shot in the ring, and it had that swinging bag with barbed
yeah,
wire, wrapped around it, the way he shot it was just so rhythmical and had such a great beat and music that I'm the one being killed at the end, and I'm clapping at the end if I take myself out of my own role. And we went and I don't know if it was Milan or where we went with this one, but it was the one where we had the screening for it. We had buyers from all over the world, and you guys introduced me as the star and being there in person. It was sold. I mean, it was packed. The room was so packed. So we showed the film, and at the end of that film, they all stood up and gave it a standing ovation. I mean, they really
hmm,
liked it. And what they all said was that last fight scene was just fantastic. I think one of the key things, common denominators for your films were your ending fight scenes.
hmm.
You create a character, they make a transformation, but at the end, that ending fight scene's what everybody talks about later, going the
That's
end
right.
fight scene. And those end fight scenes we talked about, they take sometimes 6 days, 10, 12 hours a day. And we're talking about over and over and over reshoot and just getting it done. Sometimes you get frustrated because you don't know, you think you're doing a good job, and you're not missing what they call misses, is when the foot misses and there's air between you, but you just don't know from your perspective. The director or stunt coordinator, his perspective, he can tell if it's a hit or powerful enough, or check the sound and maybe the sound's off, or the film's off, or whatever. But we did those techniques over and over to sometimes it was like it was just so painful. What was the toughest out of all your movies? Which movie had the toughest ending fight scene to shoot for you in your perspective?
Well, I think it was Super Fights because it was so long. I don't know if you remember, but it was a heat wave in Pennsylvania where we were shooting that in Harrisburg, and it was a heat wave when we were making it, and there was no air conditioning in the place we were in. I think you had 5 or 6 sets of clothes because you were sweating through the clothes in the course of making the movie, and we had to keep changing it, and it's just over and over and over again. And what was great about that is that we had some of the best fighters we've ever had were in super fights because we had Chuck Jeffries and you, of course, and we had all these great fighters, and so that really raised the level of super fights to something that I think hadn't been seen before, because we had Cliff Lenderman and all these guys that were in there.
We had Cliff Linderman, but we also had, well, we had so many great ones. We had that Van Damme, the wrestler. Remember him?
Rob Van Dam, that's right, yeah,
Well, that guy, he was so impressive as a wrestler. He was so impressive. We were scheduled to shoot on set, and I know I'm going to shoot in the next hour or two. 10 hours later, I'm still sitting waiting because the Tony Lung, he just fell in love with him because his reactions were so great. And
right,
again, we talked
yeah.
about if you can sell it and react, you make the star look good. Well, he would do that in spades. He did that so well that Tony Leung, and he wouldn't quit using them. He just invented more things, created more things. Remember shooting with that guy?
Oh yeah, we used him first in Blood Moon, if you remember. He was in Blood Moon, and we fell in love with his ability to sell reactions and to remember he went through a plate glass window in that movie. And I remember the scene you were talking about. It was in the ring in Super Fights, and we thought it was going to be a couple hours. It was scheduled for a couple hours to shoot, and Tony just kept giving him more stuff to do because he was just so fantastic and really a great guy to work with, really fun to work with. And you remember we went out to dinner with him and some of his wrestler friends. We went to dinner with the Sheik, I think. Remember, and he had those barbed wire uh, the scars on his arms. It was really such a fun time.
Yeah. Well, I don't know much about American Shaolin, but it was one of my favorite ones to watch because your location was actually in China. You guys got to, go to the Great Wall of China and film in a monastery. What was that experience like?
Oh, it was great. We had a 90-day shoot in China. So we filmed at the actual Shaolin Temple for a couple of exteriors, but most of it was done in a place called Ningbo, which is just outside of Shanghai. We took over a beautiful temple there, and we were there for 90 days. And I just remember how bad the food was. Number one, the food was miserable. I asked them to bring in pizza from Hong Kong because the food was so bad. I probably lost 20 pounds during that shoot because the food was so bad. But it was really a pleasure to work with all these great martial artists and to be shooting this in China. And I really think that the script for American Shaolin was one of my favorites because it was about a kid that goes to China and becomes a Shaolin monk. And we had Daniel Day Kim, who's gone on to be a really big star.
Yeah, he's
You know,
big time.
he was on Lost and in Hawaii Five O, and now he's an
Yep.
executive producer for a bunch of movies and films. So he was great in that picture. It was a lot of fun. It was really hard work, but being in China at that time, there weren't many Americans there, so it was really hard work and long hours. But I really enjoyed making that movie.
Well, I thought Cliff Linneman was fantastic in that role.
Oh,
He was the perfect person for that role. And then also, I liked your star. I like Reese Madigan. He was the typical young kid that you wouldn't think could make that transformation in a whole bit. And I thought he did a good job in that film as well. Do you enjoy working with him? Where'd you discover him at? I know Cliff used to come. Cliff's been friends of ours, and he's been in other movies with us. But where'd you find Reese?
we found Reese through a casting agent, and he was a very good martial artist and a very skilled actor, and that's quite rare in this business. Usually, you get somebody that's a good fighter, that's not a very good actor. You get a good actor that's not a very good fighter. In that same movie, the bad guy was not a martial artist, and he caused us a lot of trouble because he couldn't do the moves very well. Where Reese was really accomplished, this guy was a better actor than he was a martial artist. So the end fight scene was more difficult because he wasn't such a good fighter.
Right.
Yeah, and after
You
making
know,
King of the Kickboxers, where we had Billy Blanks and Keith Hirabayashi Cook and these really fantastic fighters, then we had to use, we had a great fighter in Reese Madigan, but the main bad guy wasn't, had never studied martial arts before. So we were trying to teach him things at the last minute on set, and it was really hard.
it's that's called torture, and that costs money, and it's just hard. And I like Reese a lot, and I didn't recognize him. You and I, along with a lot of other martial arts film stars, went to Berlin on this film festival, and this was like
Right.
5, 6 years ago, or whatever, maybe longer. And
10 years
Reese was
ago.
one of them.
Yeah.
And Reese came up to me, and we were all there together. And Cynthia Rothrock and Richard Norton, Lauren Avedon. I mean, all these stars were there. Don Wilson, and I remember he was sitting next to me, and I said, "Can I ask you a question? I don't want to upset you." I said, "Who are you?" And he goes, "I'm Reese Madigan." I said, "I know your name, but where do I know you from? I just don't recognize you." He says, "American Shaolin." I went, "Oh, the bald-headed kid." I didn't recognize him with hair. And he was so
Okay.
humble and so nice. And you're right, he's one of the best actors. He still does, actual plays in New York City right now.
Right.
He's big time. He's such a good guy, and I always had so much respect for him. But I always felt embarrassed that I didn't know who he was when we were in Berlin. But I thought it was just more cinematic having all the monks and the Great Wall and the scenery that you had in China. If you did the film here, you'd have to build the sets. You actually got
Right.
to go film there. Was it was it hard to get there or film there, or were they easy to work with, the Chinese government?
No, the Chinese were difficult to work with. In fact, we had a Chinese crew, and they had something called the Iron Rice Bowl back then in China, where you had a job and you couldn't be fired from that job, no matter how badly you did it. And so we had a Chinese film crew, and we watched the dailies the next day after you shoot. You watch the dailies from the day before. And so we're in this dailies, and the scene is Reese Madigan has to come up and he has to hit his mark and talk to somebody. And so the first take comes on, and he walks in and he's half on camera. Like his face is only half on camera. And I'm like, oh, well, we must have printed the wrong take. So the next take happens, same thing. Only his nose is on camera. And I'm, after the dailies are over, I turn to the DP, the director of photography, and I go, "What's going on? Why why don't we have Reese Madigan on film in that?" And he says, "Oh, he didn't hit his mark." And I was like, "Yeah, but if he doesn't hit his mark, you're supposed to say something." He goes, "Oh, that's not my job. You know, it's not my fault. He didn't hit his mark." So we fired the whole Chinese crew and brought in a whole new crew from Hong Kong, but we couldn't actually fire that crew. They had to come to work every day, and they just sat in the van all day long, and then came out for lunch, and then went back in the van. But we couldn't fire them because we had hired them, so we couldn't fire them. But we had a whole nother crew, and so that was a lot of the problems that we had was that the Chinese government would do it a certain way, and the Hong Kong guys would do it any way that worked, any way that we could. And Lucas was
Oh.
the director of that one too, and he got in some trouble with the Chinese government because he wasn't following the rules so much. In
Who
fact,
was the director again?
Lucas Lowe, the guy from No Retreat, No Surrender 3,
Oh, oh my goodness. Now, see, that explains it. Who was the fight coordinator for that film? Who did the
I think
stunts?
it was Tony Leung and Yuen Kui came in for a couple of the fights.
Oh, yeah. And that again, that explains it. It's like when you have good instructors, you have good students. When you have good fight coordinators, you have great fight scenes. You know, you really do.
Yeah,
And people don't realize the amount of takes that you have to do in order to create one good scene, and how they splice them together. And it's kind of fun to be on set and watch the creation of these fight sequences. They might shoot one master, but there's a bunch of 6, 8, 10 moves. The hard part for me as a fighter actor was the inserts, because after they got everything they need, then you got to come. Usually, it's at the end of the day. They
right,
had their tricks. Remember, they throw some talcum on a shoe or whatever, put their glove on their hand, and they go, "Okay,
right.
get ready." This is where he kicks you in the face and then just slap the crap out of you. And you go, "Oh my god!" Uh, and they enjoy it. They're having a good time because they're kind of getting us back for all the gruff we've given them. But no, it's a tough doing that. My only complaint, and it's my personal complaint about No Retreat Surrender 3, and I've only mentioned to you this about a dozen times, because it's one that is an ego one and has nothing to do with you have the concept of the movie as a whole in mind because you wrote it. But you had this guy who probably didn't even know that great in martial arts at the end, where the what was the bad guy
Oh, with the
for
white
No Retreat
hair,
of Surrender 3?
the guy with the white hair. Yeah,
Ryan Hunter.
right. That's right.
Remember? And I think he had some martial arts ability, but not meant, so we had to double them. You guys doubled them almost in all that it takes. My impact that I had, or the feedback I got back after the film was, why'd you let that old man beat you two guys up? That's all I ever heard. You guys aren't that good. I go, what are you talking about? That old man beat you, kicked both of your butts at the end of that film. I've heard that 1,000 times. And I go, it's in the movie, it's a script. Damn that Keith Strandberg. He should have had me win that fight. No, but and again, I've explained this before. I'm thinking I want to be the hero or Lauren or whatever, because whatever people see on film, they believe. They truly believe what they see on film. And you're thinking of script, the storyline, and at the end, it makes all sense. I'm an actor thinking, screw the storyline. Why is this old man who doesn't even know karate beating Lauren and I up at the end? And really,
Remember,
my
he
son
had the
Travis gave me the hardest time all the time. He would always go, "Dad, if you can't even beat up an old man at the end of a film, I'm not even sure I should even listen to you." I go, "Travis, it's a movie. Believe what you see in the movies."
That's funny. Remember, he had some sort of. He would throw knives or something like that. Didn't he have some knife throwing or something like that? I haven't seen the movie in a long time.
Well, I did have
No,
the
I know
skill
what
with my
you're talking
shoe. I had the knife into my shoe, and I did enjoy that one. That was pretty good.
about. Yeah, that was
But
funny.
so you went on to do King and the Kickboxers. I think that's one of your best films ever because you had the best, some of the best talent ever in that film.
Oh yeah, King of the Kickboxers with Billy Blanks. This was another situation where we were out in LA casting, and I knew Billy from something before. I think from when we were doing Impacts, I had met him, and I saw him as a fighter, and I knew Keith Cook too from somewhere. So I brought them in, and they only had to do one or two moves, and NG was like, "Oh, yep, no problem. We'll hire them." You know, because as soon as they move, you see how good they are. And that's what people don't really understand. Like I can see somebody on film, and I go, "Oh, that's not a martial artist." Like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix. He moves, and you're like, he's not a martial artist. Uh, but normal people, they see it and they think, "Oh, he must be a great martial artist," but it's just the fight choreographer making him look good. But it's so much easier to work with really good talent like yourself or Billy Blanks or Keith Cook. It's just it's like night and day. There's so much you can do when you have a trained martial
Yeah,
artist.
that's the best of the best. I mean, those all three of those guys can kick as good as anybody ever in the history of martial arts. And that in fight scene, not only did you have talent, but you had the environment and you had the set design, was just gorgeous. I mean, that
Oh
was
yeah,
incredible. You filmed that in Thailand, right?
yeah. That was in the jungles of Thailand. We took over this place, this one hotel, and built that set in. Yeah, it took I think 2 weeks to build the set, and the final fight scene took 10 or 15 days. And it's funny because we mentioned film stunt doubles. A couple of times, Billy in that fight is doubled by a guy that's half his size. They took a Chinese kid and painted him up black to do like the twists and the turns that you were talking about. And you can't tell because it's so quick. You can't tell it's not Billy, and it's edited together so well you can't tell. But yeah, it's really amazing. But in King of the Kickboxers, there was one scene, and this scene has been nominated as one of the top 10 fight scenes of all time. It was with Keith Cook and Lauren, where Lauren goes to find him, and he's got this monkey, and these guys attack, and it only took a half a day to shoot, but it was Yuen Kui, and he had Keith Cook. So because it was Yuen Kui, such a masterful fight choreographer, and Keith Hirabashi Cook, who is such a fantastic martial artist, it's one of the best fight scenes of all time. It only took a half a day to shoot. Because you had such great talent.
No, like you said, from my perspective, as an expert, from an actor, martial artist, and I'm watching it and I'm blown away going, that's just some good stuff right there. And
Yeah.
then I think that's your probably one of your signature movies for seasonal films. So when somebody says seasonal films, they think of the great action, but they always, again, I think they always point out your ending fight scenes are the most dramatic and those that people remember the most, so and again, out of all your directors that you had, which was your favorite director to work with?
Well, I think I really enjoyed working with Yuen Kui because he knew exactly what he wanted. One of the problems with Lucas was that he didn't focus on what was important, but Yuen Kui knew what was important and knew what needed to be done. Uh, I also really enjoyed working with NG, who was the executive producer of all this. He gave me my start, and I made 10 movies with him. I'm still really good friends with him. I was in Hong Kong a month ago, and we went out to dinner and went out to lunch, and he's still such a great guy, and he was really a revolutionary in this business. He was the first to make an American movie with Hong Kong Action. He started the career of Jackie Chan, and he was at one time the president of the Hong Kong Directors Guild. So he's super famous over in China. If I mention his name, they're like, NG? Oh my God.
Right.
So,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, his impact, but your impact on the martial arts film world is undeniable. I mean, your footprint inspired so many of the new filmmakers today. I've listened to Scott Adkins and some of his interviews and his podcast, and he talks about, oh yeah, some of these early seasonal film movies what inspired me to become a martial arts star. Break into films or take karate or martial arts or whatever. So your films were the early years, and one of the films, the series of films that inspired all these others to go off. Now they still had a lot of people making movies. Don Wilson made, I think, 30 movies, but they were more American type of films that had Art Camacho as director. They're all good directors, all good films, but they have American fight choreography behind them. Totally
Hmm.
different than the Hong Kong style. And that was
Right.
your mark. And that mark now, think about it. Look at all the films coming out now that, like you said, have been inspired by your films because like John Wick 4 or all his movies, Keanu Reeves, they all have that Hong Kong style of fighting. None of them are
Right.
using the American style, the old style of fighting. Like I used in Revenge of the Ninja with Sho Kosugi. And that movie did well, but it was old style John Wayne, you
Right.
load up
Big
for a
punches.
punch. There's very
Yeah. Right.
few beats. There's more face. There's none of that. And then the difference is just totally dramatic. So your impact in NGs, and I enjoy working with NG. I always found him a nice guy to work with. He'd complain about you sometimes. He'd go, Keith, get the other Keith to move out of Lancaster. Move. He needs to move. Move. He needs to go to Los Angeles. He needs to get out of Lancaster. Remember, did he ever? He told you that probably 100 times. You need to
Oh
go to
yeah.
New York, go to Los Angeles. Oh, he's here. He's just here. He needs to move out of Lancaster.
Well, I enjoyed working with him, and I enjoyed working with you tremendously. It was really a high point of my life, and I'm really proud of the impact that we had on the world. And I'd love to see us get together again and make another movie.
But this would NG be up for it? You think?
Well, that's what I was talking to him about in Hong Kong, is trying to do a reboot of No Retreat, No Surrender, and I've talked to Scott Adkins about getting involved with it, and he would be very interested in doing it. We just gotta come up with the right project and find the money. I mean, that's the hardest thing nowadays is finding the money. When you see a movie that's on the screen, there might be 4 or 5 production companies involved with it. Like you see, it's a Legendary Pictures with a Spotlight Entertainment, all these different people get involved. When we were making movies, Keith, it was just seasonal. You know, the opening credits, it's only seasonal film because NG put the money up and we controlled it all. Now there's so many different people involved. It's so hard to get things done anymore.
Yeah. I I literally saw two martial arts films last night. I just could, I like getting up middle of the night watching films, and I watched two. First of all, I loved the fight sequences in them, but I couldn't believe how bad each movie was. The movies were so bad; they were excruciatingly bad.
Yeah.
It's just it's so bad. I don't even know how they made it into movies. But again, it doesn't matter about the acting. It doesn't matter about only thing that matters is about the fight choreography. That's the only thing that matters. I'm like watching
Well,
these going, oh my gosh. So you've got so much to be proud of in your history. The one I enjoyed the most making with you was Blood Moon because I became a co-producer with you, and
right,
we shot that in Wilmington, North Carolina at Screen Gems, and that was just a fun project. I went into the studio at first, and I met the vice president of Screen Gems, Gerald Waller, and he
right.
was the one doing the paperwork all the time, setting up, doing the contracts with all the film companies that would come into North Carolina to make movies, and a lot of movies were being made in North Carolina. And so I had the idea. I said, would you be interested to Gerald Walden? I asked him, I said, would you be interested to be a producer with us? And he goes, I'd love to. He opened up every door for us. We got access to the back lot, and just places. And it was a wonderful experience working with him. But you remember that we had this audition and we brought in all our fighters. Remember from our camp, from the action film camp
Right.
in New York? Oh my gosh, it's like they couldn't believe how good all these fighters were. Because we had them rehearsed already. They knew what to do. They could react, to sell, and kick in the whole bit. But this one story was it was we had Gary Daniels and uh, Darren Shalaby, and we had Tony
Right.
Leung and the directors, producer, everybody was
And
there. And it
Chuck
was the
Jeffries.
last guy, John, it's a friend of mine who lives in North Carolina. He helped me set everything up. And I said, I want you to audition last. And when you audition, I want you to have full attention of everybody because I really want you in this film. So he was auditioning, and we were in one of the sound stages. And the sound stages were the big, the aluminum sound stages, and the double doors were open.
Right.
And as he was auditioning, wind gust came in, took a piece of plywood, flew it up in the air, and landed on John's, my good friend's head, and knocked him out. We called
Right.
the ambulance. I thought he was dead. Gerald Walden walked over to us at that time and said, "Talk to you." And he said, "Keith, this is the exact spot that Brandon Lee was killed by an accident." And Gary Daniels looked up and said, "I refuse to film in this soundstage." And they closed that
Right.
soundstage. And fortunately for my friend John, he was fine. As soon as he went to the hospital, he came back fine, and we put him in the film. But just think how chilling that is. That he how often does wind gusts come into a soundstage, pick up a heavy piece of plywood, land it on somebody's head, and it happens to be the same exact spot that Brandon Lee was killed in the same soundstage.
Yeah, that was very eerie. I remember that story and the fact that Brandon Lee was killed on the set of The Crow, and that was filmed there too. So yeah, we never filmed that on that soundstage, and we didn't have any other problems after that. But yeah, that was an eerie thing because it wasn't windy at all. I mean, there was no wind the whole day, and then all of a sudden the wind comes up and it causes that. So that was a little crazy,
And
huh?
it was fun filming with the two British guys, Darren and Gary Daniels. God, they were talented, and Chuck Jeffries, him as well. He's always got that sense of comedic sense about him. He makes you laugh every time you're around him.
And he's such a great martial artist too. I mean, really a strong martial artist, and I particularly enjoyed because remember we rented an apartment that you and I were living together in outside of Wilmington, and we commute into the set every time. And Gary, I think, stayed out around there too. So on our days off, we'd get together and go out and explore the area and play basketball and that sort of thing. It's just so much fun.
Yeah, and yeah, we shot some scenes at the beach, and that whole I and again, like you said, I think we spent more money for cast and crew and sets and everything else and production value. And I wasn't aware of at the time that the industry was changing at that time.
Yeah, remember we had Frank Gorshin was in the movie. That was the guy that played the
Right,
Joker in the Batman series. So we had some really strong cast members. Uh, luckily the film did very well. I mean, we didn't lose money on it. The film did well in every other territory. It's just that was one example of how the industry was changing. It was going from remember before that people were buying the videotapes, and then it turned into a rental
right.
place, and so people then they wouldn't pay the kind of money that they would pay before because there wasn't as much revenue. So that was kind of the beginning of the end for us. Uh, and that time we'll never get that time back. But at the same time, let's move forward and let's try to put some other project together, Keith.
Wonderful. Well, listen, Keith, it's been wonderful having you on the show again, and it means the world. Our friendship means the world to me. And Kathy and I are to come visit you and your family in Switzerland later this year. So thank you for being on the show. And again, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, please like it, share it, and be sure to subscribe. Until next time, ciao.
Thanks for having me on.